To the Egyptians, Amun-Re was the king of the gods. But how much do you know of this divine potentate? Find out on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. The Egyptian god Amun was not always considered to be the king of the gods. To become the king of the gods was a designation that changed with the rising and falling fortunes of royal patronage. Kings often patronized their pet cults, but dynastic primacy often determined what gods were exalted to the divine royal throne. So in today's video, we're going to see the rise of Amun-Re as the preeminent god of ancient Egypt. Now, the story of Amun-Re begins in Dynasty 11, with the ascendance of the Theban dynasty of the Middle Kingdom. Amun was one of the 8 creation deities from the Hermopolis area. These 8 primordial gods were 4 gendered pairs, chief of which was Amun and his consort Amunet, and he represented the god of hiddenness. He was the god that provided a foundation for other things to happen. He was hidden. He was behind the scenes. He was creating sort of the firm foundations for other gods to build upon. When the 11th dynasty conquered Egypt from the Heracleopolians, Amun, the hidden god, was merged with the previous royal cult of Re, the sun god of Heliopolis, to create the composite god Amun-Re. The site of Amun-Re's worship was Karnak Temple. Karnak Temple covers over 100 acres and is the largest temple complex not only in Egypt, but probably the world. The Egyptians considered Karnak to be the center of the physical universe. The earliest cult activity at Karnak dates to late Dynasty 11, but by Dynasty 12 it was a thriving cult site, with temples and bark shrines. And it is from Karnak that we get the earliest reference to Amun-Re, which is from the White Chapel, which is the bark chapel that was built by Senwosret I. While the worship of Amun-Re remained a royal cult from Dynasty 12 through to the beginning of Dynasty 18, it wasn't until Thutmose III that the cult's fortunes skyrocketed. With Thutmose III's new imperial holdings in Canaan and Nubia came an infusion of wealth that resulted in the building of new temples. So during this time, Karnak was greatly expanded. Amun-Re at this time also decided to change his consort. He dumped his frumpy wife, Amunet, and hooked up with a new trophy wife, Mut, the mother goddess, Lady of Heaven. And together, Amun-Re and Mut had a child, Khonsu, the moon god. While this change of consort became the official religion of late Dynasty 18, traces of Amunet worship, shrines, and sacred bark scenes are still visible at both Karnak and Luxor temples. Amun-Re, Mut, and Khonsu together form what is called the Theban Triad. 3 gods united as a royal family supporting the king. All 3 were worshipped at Karnak, and each member god of the Triad had its own temple and sacred bark. In the case of Amun-Re's sacred bark, the bark had 2 compartments for 2 idols, one for Amun and the other for Re. It is interesting to note that while the composite god was portrayed in statuary as a merged single entity, the so-called real presence of the deity in the bark remained separated as two idols. Now, the Amun-Re cult had several really important festivals that started out from Karnak. Perhaps the most important festival was the Opet festival. Opet is the Egyptian name for Karnak. And this had the sacred barks from Karnak being taken on procession to Luxor Temple and back. But the other great festival of Amun-Re was the Festival of the Valley, where the Theban triad crossed the river Nile to visit the mortuary temples of the dead kings. The cult of Amun-Re remained the preeminent royal cult in Egypt until the end of Dynasty 20. At that point, there had been a radical shift in power. The priesthood of Amun-Re had grown powerful, becoming de facto rulers of Upper Egypt, leaving the pharaoh to rule Lower Egypt in fact, but Upper Egypt in name alone. So all the power of ruling Upper Egypt became vested in the priesthood of Amun-Re. So during the Third Intermediate Period, the priesthood of Amun-Re was committed to an ideology that essentially was, quote, no king but Amun-Re, end quote. The power of the Theban priesthood remained in place until all of Egypt was conquered by the Nubian 25th dynasty, the Assyrians, the Persians, and then finally the Greeks. During this period of humiliation, worship of Amun-Re waned in favor of gods that were a better fit with foreign sensibilities: Serapis, Isis, and Harpocrates. Finally, with the Islamic invasion, worship of Amun-Re was outlawed and the cult was finally shut down permanently. So, in summary, the cult of Amun-Re was sort of a rags to riches and then riches to rags. We see the cult of Amun-Re go from essentially a small local cult in Hermopolis and Thebes, and then was bolstered by royal patronage, and then when royalty fell out of favor and became replaced by, say, more religious concerns, and then finally by the conquest of foreign powers, the cult of Amun-Re diminished and then was finally outlawed altogether. So anyway, that's sort of the religious biography of Amun-Re, king of the gods in a nutshell. I hope you found this video interesting, and I hope you learned something today. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.